Welcome! About this time last year, I released a video outlining any and all Dragon Age 4 news and topics that had come up until that date. I debated doing another one as most of the major topics were fairly widespread in the media, but when I put it to a poll on Twitter, a large majority of you said you wanted it. So here we are. Now, unlike the last year where I structured the video around questions I saw pop up in the fandom, I'm going to structure this video by release date. Except for this one part. Before we really jump into any information on Dragon Age 4 that we have gotten, I think we need to first talk about one of the biggest topics this year so far. No, not the teaser, the Jason Schreier articles. Two major articles were released earlier this year, how BioWare anthems went wrong, and past and present of Dragon Age 4. To make it easy, remember these as the Anthem one and the Dragon Age one. The first article, the Anthem one, goes over the huge struggle with making Anthem and gives a lot of insight to what us players found lacking in the game. While I encourage you to actually read it yourself, the basic rundown is that BioWare didn't know what they wanted to do with Anthem, and then confusion, poor leadership, and most notably overworking at BioWare led to the game that we know now having really started being developed a little before the trailer we got in 2017. While many people are quick to start pointing fingers at EA for this, and admittedly, they aren't completely clean from blame, from the story painted in the articles, they actually ended up being a large factor in making positive changes to Anthem. But what the story really wants to focus on are the working conditions during crunch for the game developers. To put it mildly, people were extremely stressed and very miserable. We'll go over all of this a little bit more in the video later, but a week after this article was released, the Dragon Age one came out. In it, which again we will go over more in a bit, it details how the development of Dragon Age 4 is going. The main takeaway that fans got was that there are two versions of Dragon Age 4. The original one, codenamed Joplin, that had been worked on for about 2 years, and the current one, codenamed Morrison. This echoes what Schreier mentioned in another article that I mentioned in my last video on Dragon Age 4 news, where he stated that Dragon Age 4 had been rebooted. Again, we'll go over all of that in just a bit, but I want to stress this. In the last video I did, it included information we have been getting from devs since Inquisition's release to a little after it had been reworked. While we have a vague idea on when the game was rebooted, at this point in time we don't know what extent of Joplin made it into Morrison. While everything in this video should be current, I'm not even sure what from the last video still applies. Also, I want to say there have been a lot more joke tweets from random devs who have been working on Dragon Age 4 about Dragon Age 4, but in an effort to not be that guy who stalks the entire dev team for some secret information on a silly video game, here is just a few screenshots of all the ones that have come across my radar in the past few months. There you go. So, with all of that in mind, July 2018. In late July, a small novel that sells itself as a real-world version of the in-game book Hard in Hightown was released. While a cute book, it didn't really hold much information for Dragon Age 4, so if you want more on that, you can see my video about it. The most I can say for it is that Hard in Hightown is one of the few times the mysterious executors come up. If you don't know who or what they are, the TLDR is that they are a mysterious power that can contact the Inquisition through the War Table missions and claim to be watching them and Thetis, as they are higher powers from across the sea. There have been a lot of hints building up to the Executors and Inquisition, so some took this as a sign that they could show up in Dragon Age 4. August 2018. An article from a site called Segment Next was released based on an IGN Greece article that stated that Dragon Age 4 had a 2020 release. Patrick Weeks would later go on to say that they have not announced any release date. Now, the article that the Segment Next one is based on is obviously in Greek, but with dubious help from Google Translate, it describes a vague meeting with someone who works at BioWare on a title that isn't Anthem or Mass Effect, and they are currently doing voiceovers for the game. Now, the translation Google gives says that they will release the title in 2 years, so I'm not really sure if they are talking about this mysterious game this mysterious person worked on, or the actual title of the game. But quite frankly, the Segment Next article is sort of worthless, as at one point it mentions that BioWare will get shut down if Anthem is a success, and then links to one of their own articles describing how BioWare won't shut down if Anthem isn't a success. So focusing back on the original Greece article, who did IGN Greece talk to? Well, I'm not sure. Part of me wonders if IGN Greece wasn't tricked, as the point in the development cycle that the supposed employee describes is exactly where the fandom thought Dragon Age was at this point in time. But all of this would also conflict with the much more widely accepted Schreier articles, so we're just going to trash this. September 2018. After more Anthem information comes out, people started to get really upset that they don't like what they see and complain that this game is what killed the Mass Effect series and what will kill Dragon Age, or that Dragon Age will never come out due to BioWare shutting down or focusing on Anthem completely. So with all of that in mind, when a VG247 article comes out that headlines that new Dragon Age and Mass Effect titles will be influenced by Anthem, a mass panic starts to occur. Casey Hudson, current head of BioWare, will go on Twitter to say that any Dragon Age and Mass Effect game would be designed from the ground up and based on what these games should be, which I assume he means single player. Now, this too would actually be conflicted with the Schreier articles in that it mentions that Dragon Age 4 would use the same code base as Anthem, not built from the ground up, but we'll talk more about that in a minute. Mark Dara would also go on to confirm that they were working on a new Dragon Age game, which sounds like not a lot, but that was one of the frankest confirmations that the fans had at that point, so a lot of people exploded about it. October 2018. Someone asked Mark Dara if perhaps they would consider Dragon Age Origins remake/remaster, and it seems that it's something they're interested in, but not in the middle of. Now I mention this because I'm sure if there's any vague Dragon Age stuff, people will wonder if it's going to be a remaster. While it is something that they would like to do, it seems that it's not their current priority, at least of October 2018. Because if it was, they probably wouldn't be answering questions over it on Twitter. November 2018. During Dragon Age Inquisition's 4th anniversary, Patrick Weeks tweeted out this. Happy 4th birthday to Dragon Age Inquisition. Whatever happens in the future, I'm proud to have been a part of a team committed to making its players' lives better. We have some of the best, geekiest, most passionate fans in the world, and my life is better for knowing you. Now, because he said whatever happens in the future, this sent fans up in an absolute tizzy that BioWare was going to die or Dragon Age would be shut down. While he has not gone on to elaborate what this means, I think the fans jumped the gun a little bit on worrying here. While it doesn't sound great, there would be no way that he would go onto Twitter to hint that the company is dying. That would be a huge risk to his career. In all likelihood, he didn't mean anything deep or conspiratorial by it. We are all bound by time, even Dragon Age. One day, Patrick Weeks will leave the team and Dragon Age will end. And no matter if everything explodes or Dragon Age ends peacefully surrounded by his adoring fans in a final game, he will be proud that he was on it. It's honestly just a sweet sentiment that just so happened to poke on a paranoid fan base. Also a few days later, Weeks would later go on and joke about the event on Twitter, which calmed a lot of nerves. Later in the month, Hudson would release an update blog about the current state of BioWare. A lot of it had to do with Anthem, but along with a scrap thread of Mass Effect fans, this was said. If you've been following these blogs from myself and Mark Dara on Twitter, you know we're also working on some secret Dragon Age stuff. Dragon Age is an incredibly important franchise in our studio, and we're excited to continue its legacy. Look for more on this in the coming month, though I won't tell you where to look. Now, immediately, people will go on to worry that this new game is not Dragon Age 4, and at worst, it's actually a phone game. My god. This is somewhat based on that year's EA Play event and soon-to-be released title, where the game series Command & Conquer got a watered-down phone game release that angered many. Now, remember, Dragon Age already has a watered-down mobile game, so there really was no reason to worry about that at all. The less paranoid fans then begin to wonder where we would have to look for this new hint, with the most likely answer being the upcoming Video Game Awards, which she already knew Anthem was going to be a part of. So then, it was just a waiting game. December 2018. Early in December, a VentureBeat article came out that reported on a mysterious source that claimed that the next Dragon Age was at least 3 years away, and stated that the real reason why Mike Laidlaw left the studio in 2017 was because all the work that had been put into the game was trashed in favor of a live service business model. Now I, like many, were very skeptical of the article. It states that Laidlaw was a writer for the series when he was a lead designer. It noted that while something was to be shown for Dragon Age during the Game Awards, the team doesn't have a name for the game, but it could come up with one before the Game Awards, which I just found really odd. But despite the oddities of this article, the Schreier article will later go into some more detail about a lot of this and confirm most of what was brought up, minus details of Laidlaw's departure. So this was likely an early hint of what was going to come. And then, it was time for the Video Game Awards.
It's time to look at another game announcement world premiere.
At last, I suspect you have questions.
And it was here. It was finally here, an actual teaser for the game so many had waited for. To say the fandom was pumped was a bit of an understatement. There's actually a lot to say on the breakdown of this trailer, so you can check out my, movie, I guess, that I made not too long after it was released. After this, a lot of devs would go on to change their Twitter bios to include they were working on this new game, and we started to see a fairly decent picture of who was working on it, which included most of those who worked on Inquisition. Only a few days after the teaser was released, the final issue of the comic Dragon Age Deception came out. I detail this more in the teaser video, but what was thought of as a lost object in the series, the Red Lyrium idol / Meridus sword, was now an object that our heroes had to find, something mirrored in the teaser. Now, so far that has been the last of the comics to be released, but there is another in the works. At the moment, we have no release date or title, only a cliffhanger, hints from the writers, and a few concept sketches of a character that hasn't been in any of the comics so far. Around mid-December, someone asked David Gator, previous head writer of the Dragon Age series, if Fenris would come back one day, and he replied this. We later go on to remind everyone that he is no longer at BioWare, so he has no way of knowing, but it's something to keep in mind. January 2019. From here on out, things become pretty quiet from the dev team on BioWare, presumably because the release of Anthem was right around the corner and rumors that everyone that could work on it was so that it would be shipped were already spreading. While all this is going on, that mobile game I mentioned, Heroes of Dragon Age, ended up having a Dragon Age 4 themed event. Really, other than existing, not much could be gained as far as hints goes. The Faces of Thetis would also release, sort of, this month. Now, if you don't know what that is, The Faces of Thetis is an expansion for the Dragon Age role-playing game tabletop set, and it also has been held back for a while for reasons unknown. Some fans would get a little upset over it as parts of the lore were way off from where they should be, but that's that. February 2019. Around early February, EA released an earnings call. Jordan of the Exalted March and the other half of our BioWare podcast Split the Veil noted that during the presentation, EA was very quick to blame single player in the fall of Battlefield 5. This would cause some to worry about a single player Dragon Age 4. Now, this is a complicated issue and something we talked about in depth at the podcast, but to sum it up, it sounds bad. It could be bad. But we have heard other reports that Dragon Age 4 will be single player focused, and at the moment we have no hard facts. March 2019. Nothing really happened, honestly. Pretty much everyone was focused on Anthem at this point, which is honestly a whole other story, which would be better summed up during April 2019. The Kotaku articles. Like I mentioned earlier, the one about the troubles involving Anthem came out first. This is one of those things that I honestly think is better read than explained, so both articles are linked down below, but for those who don't wish to or can't remember quite what they said and did read it, here are the parts that really touch on the next Dragon Age game. If you want a more in-depth discussion on this article, we have a podcast episode on this as well. What the Anthem article really focused in on is the chaotic nature of the development of Anthem. Troubles with the engine, unfocused leadership, bitterness between the Edmonton and Austin BioWare offices, and dev team burnout due to crunch. During all of this, a core team of developers were working on Dragon Age 4, codenamed Joplin. Trying to get Anthem out the door, many of that core team was then moved on to Anthem. Although one thing I'd like to point out, that actually isn't uncommon in the games industry. Now, around this time, BioWare also wanted to move their games to a live service model, something we are not quite sure what that means yet, to be honest. And so they decided to cancel Joplin and restart Dragon Age 4 under a new codename of Morrison, with a smaller team working on it. There is a bit more to this, but it wasn't revealed until the other article, so let's just move on to the other major Dragon Age point in the Anthem one. The other point was that in an effort to not restart the code over and over again, causing a lot of troubles for the dev team, Dragon Age 4 will use the same code base as Anthem. This doesn't mean that Dragon Age 4 is going to be all multiplayer, just as the two games will share some of the same basic skeleton underneath it all. To be honest, we don't really know what exactly it will look like to us. Now, regarding this article, BioWare quickly released a statement about it, but let's pause that for a moment and move on to the other article, the one focusing on Dragon Age 4's development. It stated that work on Joplin didn't start right after Inquisition and had only been worked on for about 2 years before it was rebooted. This is what the article states about what Joplin was. You'd play as a group of spies in Tevinter Imperium, a wizard-ruled country on the north end of Dragon Age main continent, Thetis. The goal was to focus as much as possible on choice and consequence, with smaller areas and fewer fetch quests in Dragon Age Inquisition. In other words, they wanted Joplin to be the opposite of the hinterlands. There was an emphasis on repeat play, one developer said, noting that they wanted to make areas that changed over time and missions that branched in interesting ways based on your decisions, to the point where you could even get non-standard game overs if you followed certain paths. A large chunk of Joplin would center on heists. The developers talked about building systematic narrative mechanics, allowing the player to perform actions like persuading or extorting guards without the writers having to handcraft every scene. It was all very ambitious and very early, and would have no doubt changed drastically once Joplin entered production, but members of the team say that they were thrilled about the possibilities. Production was going very smooth on Joplin before it was rebooted. Despite the rumored reboot having happened in late 2017, the anonymous developers that talked to Schreier still wasn't sure on how much of Joplin would make it into Morrison. And now, some quotes on Morrison. By 2017, EA had not been secret about its desire to make all of its major products into games as a service, best defined as games that can be played and monetized for months and years after their release. Traditional Dragon Age games did not fit into that category. Inquisition had a multiplayer mode, but was something like that really going to bring in the long-term revenue that EA wanted from expensive projects like Dragon Age 4? Unlike Joplin, this new version of the 4th Dragon Age is planned with a live service component, built for long-term gameplay and revenue. One promise from management, according to a developer, was that in EA's balance sheet they'd be starting from scratch and not burdened with the 2 years of money that Joplin had already spent. Question was, how many of those ideas and prototypes would they use? It's not clear how much of Joplin's vision will shape Morrison, at least some of it will, says one person on the game. But shortly after the reboot, creative director Mike Laidlaw left, as did some other veteran Dragon Age staff. Matt Goldman, art director of Dragon Age Inquisition, and then Joplin took over as creative director for Morrison, while Dara remained executive producer on both that project and Anthem. We're not sure about all the details, and in fact they're likely still being decided, as the game is still very early in development and could evolve based on the negative reception to Anthem. Rumor among BioWare circles for the past year have been that Morrison is Anthem with Dragons, a snarky label conveyed to me by several people. But a couple of current BioWare employees have waved off that description. The idea was that Anthem would be the online game, and that Dragon Age and Mass Effect, while they may experiment with online portions, that's not what defines them as franchises, said one. I don't think you'll see us completely change those franchises. When asked, a few BioWare developers said that it'd be technically possible for a game built on Anthem's codebase to have an offline branch, but it's not yet clear whether Morrison will take that approach. If it does turn out to be an online game, which seems likely, it would be shocking if you couldn't play the bulk of it by yourself. Diablo 3, for example, is online only on PC, yet can be played entirely solo. One person close to the game told me this week that Morrison's Critical Path, our main story, would be designed for single player, and that the goal for the multiplayer elements would be to keep people engaged so that they would actually stick with post-launch content. Single player downloadable content like Dragon Age Inquisition's Trespasser, while often excellent, typically sells only a fraction of the main game, according to developers from BioWare and elsewhere across the industry. Yet this wouldn't be a live service game if it was a repeat of Dragon Age Inquisition, which compartmentalized its single and multiplayer modes. Fans in the past have grown outraged at the idea of BioWare putting a lot of emphasis on multiplayer gaming, but there are ways in which a service-heavy Dragon Age 4 could be ambitious and impressive. For example, some ideas I've heard floated from Morrison's multiplayer includes companions that can be controlled by multiple players via drop-in, drop-out co-op, similar to old-school BioWare RPGs like Baldur's Gate, and requests that could change based not just on one player's decisions, but on the choices of players across the globe. So the main takeaways from the final article are the details on Joplin, being unsure of how much of that is in Morrison, and that they were still looking to be about 2 to 3 years in development still. So let's jump back to the BioWare reception to all of this. Soon after the first article, and I mean like minutes after, they released a blog post condemning the article for, in short, promoting toxicity towards team members and leaders, and threw a dagger at Schreier for publishing the article and not making the industry and craft better. This was received with extreme negativity from both fans and team members from BioWare, as Schreier would go on to say in a tweet. He would later post another short article that an email was sent out to those that work at BioWare from Casey Hudson saying that the problems in the article are real and that they are working to solve them, which Schreier described as some people finding comforting. Now, a small thing that happened in between the two articles was that GameStop in various places, but roughly around Europe, put out a pre-order for Dragon Age 4, stating that it had a release of 2019. Now, this isn't actually based on any information, this is just something that GameStop just does. A lot of games that have been announced you can actually pre-order on GameStop even before they have release dates. Dara would then go to joke about it, asking for people to send him a copy when they get it. May 2019. At the very beginning of May, Dara would tweet again that they are not working on Dragon Age 3 or Dragon Age 5, then linking to the teaser that was put out in December. And soon after that, it was officially announced that the team members who were pulled from Dragon Age 4 to work on Anthem were now back on Dragon Age 4, meaning that production on Dragon Age 4 was now in full swing in the BioWare Edmonton office. And then the Dragon Age Keep went down. While this has been happening every so often during the past year, the Dragon Age Keep goes down for a few days, the longest it has ever been down. It was down for so long, people began to wonder if they had taken the Keep offline to update it for something in the future, except that it came back online with nothing changed at all. If anything, this just made fans more fearful about the state of the game when servers finally go down for good. Now, if you may remember from last year, the BioWare store had closed down. This was due for many reasons, but the main part being that BioWare was no longer happy with the service they were using to create merchandise. In late May, Jinx, a brand that sells licensed gear for a ton of popular games, released a line of both Mass Effect and Dragon Age gear. People began to get hyped, even more so that there was an empty square on their website that showed the image from the teaser trailer. June 2019. And now we are up to date. So far, there hasn't been a lot of answers with Dragon Age 4, but there has been one major question. Will we see something during E3/EA Play season? And the answer is we don't really know. The most likely time we would see anything is during EA Play, which is this June 8th starting at around 9:15 Pacific time. But they have already listed the scheduled events, and BioWare isn't even on there. In theory, there could be trailers for new games shown in between the time slots, but even that hasn't been confirmed yet. Something to also remember is that BioWare will still be at the event, just not interviewed during the livestream, so it's not like they aren't there at all, they're just working with the actual people who went to the event and not the livestream. But there are two things to keep in mind. If you remember last year's E3/EA Play event, devs were very quick to respond that there would be no Dragon Age that year, while this year there has been just radio silence. On the other hand, when the teaser was shown during the Video Game Awards, there was not only an official hint that something Dragon Age will be shown soon, but even some leaks that it was going to be the Dragon Age 4 and not some other Dragon Age spin-off. So our best guess at the moment is that the next Dragon Age game is at least 2 years away, and now that they have teased just a bit, the next question we should be asking ourselves is how many teasers should we expect before we start to get real marketing on the game? For the most part, most BioWare games have one small video where it's hinted at, and it can range for 3 to 4 years before the game is released, and then another video about a year after that to release the name of the game, usually about a year before the game is released. So while there is no hard rule to say it won't happen, it would be unusual to get a full teaser or even a title when the game is this far away. I think at this point we can hope for some more vague Twitter hints and a release date for more Dragon Age tie-in material. Anything else I would find surprising, but I think it's just kind of fun to hope going into these things. And that, dear patrons, is all that we know of Dragon Age news for the past year. If you want more up-to-date information on Dragon Age 4, you can check my Twitter, or you can listen to our podcast with The Veil. Usually for Major Things, we'll have an episode attached to it. If there's any other teasers or whatever, we will usually live stream very quickly after it on my livestream channel, Codex Added. Or if you just want kind of short, quick videos explaining some of the minor news things, then go check out Jackdaw Journalism, that's more his speed. If you still have lingering questions, proof that I'm wrong, comments about your own fan theory, feel free to tweet me at Gilderthon on Twitter, or send a PM to user Gillenon on Reddit. The rest are all.